Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're diving into a foundational, century-old text, John Dewey's Democracy in Education. Now, I know what you might be thinking, a textbook from over 100 years ago, but trust me, the ideas packed inside this book are urgently relevant to how our society functions right this very second. Dewey isn't just giving us a dry manual on classroom management, he's literally decoding the basic biological and social necessities of human survival. He makes this incredible argument that education isn't just some nice-to-have option or a luxury, it is the absolute fundamental mechanism of human continuity. So to really get where Dewey is coming from, we've got to start exactly where he does, with a deeply existential question. What is the most notable distinction between living and inanimate things? Basically, how do we actually separate what's alive from what isn't? Now, I know that sounds more like a question for a biology class than an explainer on education, but as you'll see in just a minute, Dewey uses this exact biological truth to set up his entire problem solution arc for how human society actually survives and renews itself. All right, let's jump straight into our first big concept, life as constant renewal. Picture this, a really stark contrast. Think about a stone. If you take a hammer and strike that stone, it's going to do one of two things, right? It either passively resists the blow, remaining outwardly unchanged, or if you hit it hard enough, it just shatters into a million pieces. But notice what it never does. It never attempts to use the force of that blow to sustain itself. Now, a living thing? Entirely different story. Sure, it can be crushed by a superior force, but it actively tries to take the energies acting upon it and turn them into the means for its own survival. It takes light, air, soil, and it literally uses them. It turns its environment into growth. So life, as Dewey defines it, is this constant, self-renewing process through action upon the environment. And here is where it gets super interesting, because just as a physical plant or animal has to renew itself to survive, a human social group has to do the exact same thing. But we face a massive, dangerous gap here. On one side, we have the immature newborn, born utterly helpless, no language, zero beliefs, and completely indifferent to whatever society wants. On the other side, we have the mature adult who holds all the vital knowledge, customs, and practices of their group. And well, every member of a society eventually passes away. If we don't bridge that huge gap between the helpless newborn and the capable adult, the social group dies out just as surely as a plant starved of water. Education, and education alone, is what bridges that gap. Which brings us to Section 2, Communication Creates Community. Dewey hits the nail on the head when he says, society not only continues to exist by transmission, by communication, but it may fairly be said to exist in transmission, in communication. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that communication isn't just some handy tool we use while we happen to live in a society together. It is the very fabric of existence itself. I mean, think about the deep literal connection between the words common, community, and communication. You literally cannot have one without the other. But wait, we need to look at this strictly through Dewey's lens, because his definition of communication might be different from yours. Communication isn't just talking. It isn't just passing data from my brain to your brain, like I'm handing you a physical brick. For Dewey, communication is sharing an experience until it becomes a common possession. It actually physically alters the attitude of both the speaker and the listener. It's an interaction that secures similar emotional and intellectual dispositions. To genuinely communicate an experience to someone else, you have to step outside yourself, formulate your thought, and imagine exactly how the other person is going to receive it. And this brilliantly illustrates why physical proximity alone does not create a society. You can have people working shoulder to shoulder, but if they're just acting like parts of a machine, working cooperatively for a result without any real awareness or shared interest in the outcome, they do not form a community. A true community requires members who are fully cognizant of the common end goal and who are actively communicating their purpose and progress with each other. Consensus absolutely demands communication. Barking orders that someone might get a job done, but it definitely doesn't create a true sharing of purposes. Let's move on to Section 3, Understanding Our Social Environment. Okay, normally when we hear the word environment, we just think of the physical stuff around us, the room we're in, the chair we're sitting on. But Dewey gives us a way more dynamic definition. He says your environment actually consists of those conditions that promote or hinder, stimulate or inhibit your characteristic activities. A rock doesn't really have an environment because a rock doesn't have activities. But for a living, breathing human, your environment is whatever you are actively interacting with. Just think about your workspace right now. Your environment isn't just the drywall around you, it's the projects, the glowing screens, and the people stimulating your daily actions. To really put this into perspective, Dewey offers some pretty fantastic examples. Take an astronomer.
Their immediate physical surroundings might be a tiny, freezing dark room, but their true environment includes the remote stars and their telescope because those are the elements their activities are completely tied to. Or an antiquarian, their environment is actually a remote epoch of history and ancient relics. And for an Arctic explorer, the North Pole is their environment, even if they never actually reach it, because the mere idea of the pole is what defines, drives, and stimulates literally all of their actions. So your environment can span vast amounts of time and space. It's simply whatever you are genuinely engaged with.
Now we're getting to the really good stuff. Section 4, training versus genuine education. This brings us to one of Dewey's most critical warnings, and it's a game changer. There is a massive, massive difference between training and genuine education. Think about it. You can train a rat in a maze using cheese and mild shocks. The rat acts exactly how you want it to, but the rat doesn't care about your scientific goals. It just wants the cheese. The same goes for training a horse with a bridle. Human education, on the other hand, absolutely requires participating in a shared activity. The learner isn't just modifying their muscles to avoid pain or get a sugary treat. They are mutually sharing the ideas and the emotions of the activity itself. They become a full-on co-partner. Let's look at the classic example of a child who touches a hot stove. If you set up conditions so a kid gets a mild burn every time they touch a specific toy, yeah, they're going to quickly learn to avoid it. But as Dewey points out, this is merely training. Sure, it changes their outer action, but it doesn't necessarily impart any real educative understanding. The child might just develop this irrational fear of the toy. To get true education, we need a shared activity, an actual exchange of meaning, not just a physical reaction to pain. Dewey uses this brilliant anecdote about acquiring language to prove his point. Think about how a child actually learns what the word hat means. It's not by someone just blasting the sound into their ear over and over. Step 1, the baby just hears meaningless noises. But then step 2, the mother says the word hat while physically putting the hat on the child's head. Step 3, they both share in this joint physical activity and the excitement of getting ready to go outside. Because they are partners in this action, the sound hat becomes a shared sign of this mutual experience. Language isn't handed over physically, it's acquired through joint shared action. Let's wrap things up with Section 5, the role of formal schooling. In early, undeveloped social groups, education is pretty incidental. Kids naturally learn through direct sharing, playing, and just imitating the adults around them. They pick up the customs simply by taking part in daily survival. But as civilization advances, a huge gap opens up. The concerns of adults become incredibly complex. I mean, much of what adults do today is so remote in space and meaning that playful imitation just doesn't cut it anymore. You can't just playfully imitate advanced calculus or macroeconomics, right? So society invents formal instruction. We delegate teaching to special people in specific places called schools, and we rely heavily on books and symbols to try and bridge that divide. But, and this is a big but, this transition brings massive dangers. When education shifts from active participation to formal instruction, it can so easily become dead and abstract. Instead of experiencing a joint activity to learn something, a student might just read isolated symbols about a Greek helmet in a textbook, with absolutely zero connection to their actual life. The material becomes totally isolated from ordinary customs of thought. And worse, it risks creating what Dewey calls sharps in learning, these highly specialized experts who possess a ton of technical information but lack any real social disposition. The learning is just no longer vital. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question. As our society gets more and more complex, and our formal schooling gets more and more specialized, how do we avoid this split? How do we stop the disconnect between what we consciously learn from a book in a classroom and what we unconsciously absorb by actually living and associating with others? How do we make sure our schools aren't just training students like animals navigating a maze for a good grade, but are actually educating them as active, emotionally invested partners in our society? This was an urgent philosophical problem back in 1915, and honestly, looking at our world today, it's a problem we are still desperately trying to solve. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a powerful new lens for looking at how we learn. Catch you next time.